Members of the jury, that is the case for the Crown. It is often said that no two crimes are alike or identical. Each one has its unique aspects. There is undoubtedly one aspect of this case that is, for me, sadly unique. We live in a welfare state, a country that ensures that the poor and underprivileged do not go without the essentials of life. There are many government bodies and organizations whose function it is to carry out that vital work. In this welfare state, we wage a constant battle against poverty. And if it can be said that we have frontline troops or agents in that battle, then surely it is our social workers. Yet here we find two social workers, Jane Heathfield and John Morris, jointly charged with two offences under the Theft Act. They're charged with dishonestly handling by receiving a quantity of meat, knowing or believing it to have been stolen. The quantity being 50 pounds, the value being 38 pounds. They're further charged with attempting to steal an entire lorry load of meat, attempting therefore to take property dishonestly, intending to permanently deprive the owners of it. The quantity of that meat being 21,840 pounds, the value of that meat being 16,380 pounds. Members of the jury, I have outlined the prosecution's case to you. I will now call Detective Inspector Graham Pritchard. Detective Inspector Pritchard, I understand that you were in charge of investigations concerning theft over a considerable period of time from the Acme Cold Storage Company.
That is correct.
Before dealing with the matters that have brought the two defendants to this court, I wonder if you'd tell my lord and the jury some of the background to those investigations.
CID Fulchester were contacted nearly 5 months ago by the Acme Cold Storage Company. They advised us that they were the victims of sustained pilfering, which was causing them considerable concern.
And what was it, Inspector, that was being stolen?
Quantities of meat, sir. To be more specific, quantities of beef.
And what, if anything, did your investigations establish?
The meat stored by the company is subject to computer control. It's a relatively simple exercise to establish that during the past 5 months, some 500 pounds of meat had been stolen from the refrigerated units.
Inspector, you refer to 500 pounds. Do you mean that was the value of the meat?
No, my lord, that was the weight,
Ah.
the quantity of meat stolen. It had a retail price value. May I consult my notes, my lord?
Certainly.
It had a retail price value of approximately £470.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes.
Carry on, please.
Our investigations established that the meat was being stolen in fairly small quantities each time, 50-pound boxes which were easy to handle and move.
Were you able to establish exactly how these boxes of meat were being stolen?
No, sir, we were not. But in view of the evidence, we arrived at certain conclusions.
Well, Detective Inspector, in view of the fact that the court has not had the benefit of that evidence, perhaps you'd tell my lord and the jury what those conclusions were.
No one could have obtained access to the refrigerated units and removed the boxes of meat without assistance from a member of the company staff.
My lord. Yes, thank you, Mr. Lieutenant. Inspector, do I understand you to say that these thefts, to use common parlance, were an inside job?
Well, my lord, they could not have been committed without inside help.
Ah. Neither of the defendants is employed or has been employed by the Acme Cold Storage Company?
No, my lord.
Then the implication of this evidence is that a third person, or indeed perhaps more, is involved in the thefts with which the two defendants are accused.
That is so, my lord.
Well, there are only two people in the dock. Do you intend to produce any evidence linking the two defendants with a member of the Acme Cold Storage Company?
No, my lord, I have no such evidence to offer.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in view of the admission by Mr. Templeton that he does not intend to call any evidence linking the two defendants with a member of the Acme Cold Storage Company, you will disregard the fact that a third person may or may not have been involved. Thank you, Mr. Templeton. You may continue.
As your lordship pleases. Detective Inspector Pritchard, I'd like to turn now to the events of the 20th of December last. Did you receive a telephone call from a Mr. Bernard Cunliffe, the managing director of the Acme Cold Storage Company?
Yes, I did.
And as a result of that telephone call, did you then go to the company's refrigeration plant in Habberton Road, Fulchester?
Yes, I did. The two defendants that had been apprehended on the company's premises. Mr. Cunliffe had caught them attempting to drive away a 14-ton refrigerated lorry.
What was in the lorry?
The lorry was loaded with 437 boxes of frozen meat. The gross weight of the meat was 21,840 pounds. The retail value was 16,380 pounds.
What action did you take?
I initially interviewed Jane Heathfield and John Morris in the security office on the company's site. They were then taken to Fulchester Police Station. After further questioning, were charged with attempting to steal the lorry load of meat.
Did either defendant make an official statement?
No, sir, they refused to make a statement. They had previously refused to answer virtually all the questions that I'd asked them.
Detective Inspector, I earlier questioned you about a series of thefts that had taken place prior to the night of the 20th of December from the Acme Cold Storage Company. His Lordship has ruled that certain questions concerning those thefts were improper. I would like to ask you, however, if there were any subsequent developments concerning those thefts that relate to the two accused.
Yes, sir, there were. Our investigations revealed that there was a direct link between the two accused and the disposal of certain quantities of that stolen meat. As a result of these investigations, Jane Heathfield and John Morris were further charged on the 18th of January this year with dishonestly handling by receiving a 50-pound box of meat, knowing it or believing it to have been stolen. The value of the meat was 38 pounds.
Did they make any statement when charged?
No, sir, they did not.
Thank you very much, Detective Inspector.
Just one moment, please, Mr. McLennan. Inspector, I want to be quite clear, and I want the jury to be quite clear. This subsequent charge concerning the 50-pound box of meat.
Yes, my lord.
That was meat stolen prior to the night of December the 20th last?
Yes, my lord.
And allegedly handled and received prior to that date?
That is so, my lord.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, Mr. McLennan.
Inspector Pritchard, I would like initially to deal with the events that occurred on the night of December the 20th last.
The night they were arrested?
Yes, exactly so. You said just now, in answer to a question from my learned friend, Mr. Cunliffe caught them attempting to drive away a 14-ton lorry, refrigerated lorry. Is that correct?
Yes, that is so.
Where exactly was this 14-ton lorry?
It was parked in one of the loading and unloading bays.
Inside the company plant?
Yes.
So they were on company premises at the moment that this Mr. Cunliffe saw them?
Yes.
Surely that would have entailed passing through a security gate?
Yes, it would, unless entry to the premises had been forcibly made.
Did you find any evidence whatsoever that a forcible entry had been effected?
No, sir, we did not.
Inspector, how many security gates does the company have?
5. They are manned 24 hours.
And none of these security checkpoints saw either of the two defendants?
No, they did not.
Yes. Now, with regard to the lorry, what exactly were the two defendants doing at the time that Mr. Cunliffe saw them?
With respect, my lord, my learned friend is aware that I shall be calling Mr. Cunliffe to give evidence. In view of the fact that it was he and not the detective inspector who saw the two accused, might I suggest that the question of their specific movements at that moment be addressed to the managing director of the company?
Yes, I quite agree, Mr. Templeton.
Inspector, you said when questioned, both defendants virtually refused to answer all the questions you asked them. What kind of questions did you, in fact, ask them?
I asked them to give me an explanation for being on the company's premises. I asked them what they were doing in the lorry. I asked them how they got into the company's premises in the first place.
To all these questions, you received no reply?
That is correct. I formed the conclusion that the fact that they'd been caught red-handed had rendered them speechless.
I would be grateful, Detective Inspector, if you would confine yourself to answering the questions. Your conclusions are not relevant.
My lord, I can see nothing untoward in Inspector Pritchard telling the court what his thoughts were during his interrogation of the accused. I would have thought them highly relevant.
I don't think a little latitude would be amiss, Mr. McLennan.
As your lordship pleases. Tell me, Inspector, what information did you obtain from my clients at that time?
They were social workers.
Is that all?
They also gave me their names and addresses.
Anything else?
No, not really. To say that they were uncooperative would be putting it mildly.
And at Fulchester Police Station, even after they had been charged with a very serious crime, they still maintained the silence.
Yes, I've already said that, sir.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed you have. When you cautioned them, of course, you would have told them of their right to remain silent. But you yourself were not quite so untalkative, were you?
I asked them a great many questions, if that's what you mean.
No, that's not what I mean. Did you not also say, a pair of social workers? You should both be bloody well ashamed of yourselves.
Yes, I did.
Why, Detective Inspector?
Because I felt strongly about it. I was angry. These people are government employees, people in positions of trust. I spend a great deal of time on community relations work. Two people like that can set that work back 5 years. If the public can't trust the police or any servant of the state, like a social worker, what good is it for me or any police officer to tell the public that these are the people to turn to when they need help or are in trouble? What these two people have done is about the same as a doctor stealing from one of his patients.
Mr. Cunliffe, you're the managing director of the Acme Coal Storage Company.
Yes, I am.
On the 20th of December, did you telephone Fulchester Police Station and advise Detective Inspector Pritchard that you'd caught two people attempting to steal a lorry load of beef?
Yes, I did.
Do you see those two people in this courtroom?
Yes, those two people in the dock, the social workers.
Would you tell my lord and the jury the circumstances leading to their discovery on your company premises?
Yes. I'd been working late, checking the computer printout figures on our current stock position.
One moment, please. Could the witness be shown Exhibit 6, please? Is that the list you refer to?
Yes, it is.
Carry on, please.
I was on my way to the car park when I heard someone trying to start one of our 14-tonners in Bay 3. I found those two in the lorry. The ignition was on, and the man was sitting in the driver's seat with a woman next to him. He was trying to start the lorry. The engine was turning over, but it wouldn't start.
What did you do?
Well, I called up to them to come out. For a moment, they just sat there looking at me. I said if they didn't get out, I'd climb up and drag them out.
What happened then?
Well, they got out.
I see. And then?
Well, I asked them what the hell they thought they were doing, and instead of telling me, they just started firing questions at me.
What sort of questions?
Well, they wanted to know how much meat was in the lorry, where it had come from, how long it was going into cold storage for, that sort of thing. I told them I was going to call the police and get them arrested.
What, if anything, was their response to that?
The older one, the man.
John Morris.
Yes, he said, "You're the one that should be arrested. You're depriving the people of this country of meat." Well, I wasn't going to stand there arguing with a pair of lunatics. I called a couple of my security guards and we took them to our main security office. Then I called the police.
On the 17th of January this year, did you, at the request of Detective Inspector Pritchard, accompany him to 14 Greenslade Gardens?
Yes, I did.
Could the witness be shown Exhibit 5, please? At the time of your visit with the Detective Inspector to 14 Greenslade Gardens, were you shown that box?
Yes, I was. It was one of the 50-pound boxes of beef that had been stolen from my company last year.
Mr. Cunliffe, how can you be sure that's one of the stolen boxes?
Well, apart from my company's name on the box, these code numbers indicate exactly when this box of meat was put into cold storage. The boxes are stored according to their numerical order. Now, no box leaves cold storage without first being checked off this computer checklist. And this box has never been checked off that list. The computer checklist indicates that it was stolen from storage during November last year.
And this box was later found by the police at 14 Greenslade Gardens?
That is correct, my lord.
Thank you, Mr. Temple.
I've no further questions.
Mr. Cunliffe, you say when my clients first spoke to you, they asked you a number of questions.
Yes, they did.
Understandably, at the time, you didn't feel inclined to answer them. I wonder if you'd give me the answers. We know that there was nearly 22,000 pounds of beef in that refrigerated lorry. Where did it come from?
It was Intervention bought Irish beef. It had been blast frozen, boned, and boxed in 50-pound lots. It was going into deep storage.
Yes, could you explain to my lord and the jury just exactly how this Intervention buying works?
take me a couple of days to do that.
Now, I don't think Mr. McLennan desires a thesis on the subject, Mr. Cunliffe, just a broad outline, as far as I'm sure.
Well, Britain is a member of the common market, and as such is a party to the EEC's common agricultural policy. Now, part of that policy is to ensure a stable price on foodstuffs. Consequently, if the price of a certain item, whether it be butter, beef, or barley, falls below the agreed common market price, then the EEC governments intervene and buy. This, of course, has the effect of taking off the market a quantity of that particular food item. Now, when that item becomes in short supply, the price will inevitably rise to the agreed level. The EEC governments then allow that food item back onto the open market.
So by deliberately intervening, the government can ensure that we do not have a glut of a particular food item on the open market, and the price will remain stable.
That is correct.
Well, in theory, this policy should ensure that only small quantities of food are bought by this intervention technique before the price automatically rises because of short supply.
In theory, yes.
Yes. The price of beef in butcher shops in this country has never been higher. This presumably means there is little, if any, in cold storage throughout the EEC.
It ought to mean that.
Well, would you tell my lord and the jury just exactly how much beef is in cold storage throughout the EEC countries as a result of this intervention buying?
Well, I think the figure is in excess of 368,000 tons.
This is beef that is being deliberately kept out of the shops by the governments of the EEC.
Yes.
Mr. Cunliffe, you're the managing director of a cold storage company. Based on your considerable knowledge, what would you estimate the cost of storing that quantity of beef?
Oh, I should think £1 per week per ton would be a fair estimate.
So it's costing us £368,000 per week to keep that meat off the open market.
Yes.
My lord, surely we've wandered far enough from the path. Mr. Cunliffe is not here to justify our government's agricultural policy, but to give evidence concerning theft from his company. It's not the government who's on trial in this courtroom.
My lord, the prosecution has produced evidence from this witness concerning a conversation he had with the defendants at the time he discovered them in this lorry. A conversation during which he called them lunatics. A conversation that occurred at the time that the prosecution have alleged that they were engaged on a dishonest enterprise. It seems to me perfectly right and proper that I should refer to that conversation during the course of my cross-examination. Further, these questions are not being asked frivolously. I contend they go to the very heart of the matter if we are to seek out reasons why these two people were in that lorry.
You contend that their purpose was other than theft?
I do, my lord.
Very well, Mr. McLennan, you may continue.
I'm obliged, my lord. Mr. Cunliffe, this huge quantity of meat that we're talking about, a beef mountain, I believe is what it's called.
That's right.
Yes, this beef mountain of 368,000 tons, would I be correct in assuming that that figure is an all-time high?
You would.
Yes, would I also be correct in stating that there are over 91,000 tons of butter in cold storage in the United Kingdom, put there for the same reason, to maintain an artificially high price?
Well, I'm not sure what the official figure on butter is, but it's something of that order.
91,000 tons.
Yeah.
Is it also because of this policy of intervention buying a 2.3 billion litre wine lake within the common market?
Wine is not within my professional province, but I understand that figure was quoted in Parliament.
Indeed it was. And are you aware that it was also stated in Parliament that 19 billion pints of perfectly good milk was turned into animal foodstuff because it was considered the price would be too high for the public to buy it all? And that 339 million pounds of taxpayers' money was used by the EEC, and I quote, to buy cows' milks from farmers for converting into skim milk to feed back into their calves.
Well, yes, I am aware of those facts. But what have they got to do with this case?
My lord, I must echo Mr. Cunliffe's question.
If my learned friend, my lord, will bear with me for but a moment, I have only one or two more questions to ask this witness.
Very well, Mr. McLennan. I must warn you, we do seem to be straying into, shall I say, foreign fields.
Mr. Cunliffe, I understand that some thousands of tons of beef in this beef mountain have in fact become rotten while in cold storage. Is that correct?
No, not at my company it hasn't. We've been storing beef for the government for the past 18 months.
Are you
That's
sure?
still in prime condition.
Are you sure that none of the beef that you store for the government has become bad, inedible?
I am sure.
And is it not a fact, and I put it to you, is it not a fact that that lorry load of 22,000 pounds of beef that these two people are accused of stealing, is it not a fact that that meat was rotten, and far from it being about to be unloaded, was about to be taken from your premises and secretly dumped?
Now, that's a bloody lie. Who told you that?
I have no more questions.
No. Ask him where he got that information from. Ask him who told him I was dumping rotten beef.
Mr. Cunliffe, you are not here to ask questions, but to answer them.
Yes, I'm aware of that, my lord, but a story like that could have serious consequences.
And I'm aware of that, Mr. Cunliffe. But the sole function of this court is to determine the guilt or innocence of those two defendants with regard to the charges which they face.
Mr. Cunliffe, if we can forget all this talk of beef and butter mountains. On the 20th of December last, you found the two accused on your company premises attempting to drive away one of your lorries, a lorry that contained nearly 22,000 pounds of meat, valued at £16,380.
Yes, I did.
On the 17th of January this year, you went with the police to 14 Greenslade Gardens, Fulchester, and there identified a box, Exhibit 5. This box, containing 50 pounds of boned meat and worth £38, had been stolen from your company during November last.
That is correct.
I've no further questions, my lord.
Thank you, Mr. Cunliffe. You may leave the witness box.
Thank you, my lord.
I call Miss Valerie Johnson.
Valerie Johnson.
What is your religion?
Catholic.
You take the Dewey Bible in your right hand. Read what is on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Your full name is Valerie Johnson.
Yes, it is.
Where do you live?
14 Greenslade Gardens.
Would you speak up just a little so that my lord and the jury can hear what you say?
14 Greenslade Gardens, Fulchester.
On the 17th of January, did you receive a visit from Detective Inspector Pritchard of Fulchester CID?
Yes, I did. He came with another man, somebody from the coal storage company.
Please show the witness Exhibit 5. Did the Detective Inspector take possession of that box from you?
Yes, he did.
How had the box come into your possession, Miss Johnson?
Well, Mr. Morris and Miss Heathfield, they came round to see me one night last November. You see, they'd been giving away free meat to some of the people they looked after. Well, they promised me some, so they brought it round in that box. And as I was the last on their list, well, they left the box with me.
Have you any idea what quantity they gave you?
Well, there must have been about £2.
You're referring to the weight of the meat?
Yes, my lord.
Mm-hmm.
Did they say anything to you when they gave it to you?
Well, I didn't have very much money, but I wanted to give them something for the meat. Well, it seemed only fair. But Miss Heathfield wouldn't take any money. She said that it hadn't cost them anything and that there was plenty more where that came from.
Did Mr. Morris say anything?
Oh, yes, he said to make sure that it was properly thawed out because it had been in cold storage.
The cases in Fulchester Crown Court are fictitious, but the jury is comprised of members of the general public. The Queen against Heathfield and Morris will be continued tomorrow in the Crown Court. Jane Heathfield and John Morris, two social workers, are charged with dishonestly handling stolen meat and attempted theft of a lorry load of frozen meat. At the end of yesterday's hearing, Valerie Johnson told the court how she'd received frozen meat from the two defendants. She now resumes her evidence.
Miss Johnson, apart from telling you that they'd not paid anything for the meat, did either defendant indicate how they'd obtained it?
No, I don't think they did.
Did you ask them how they got hold of the meat?
Well, no. I was very grateful for it. I mean, it's the first bit of decent meat my son and I have had for months. Well, I assume they've been giving it to distribute to those in need.
Yes, I see. How long have you known the defendant?
Oh, ages.
Miss Johnson, by the way, is it Miss Johnson or Mrs.?
Miss, my lord.
Miss Johnson, thank you. Could you be more specific about the length of time you've known the two defendants?
Well, Mr. Morris has been looking after me now for about 2 years. Miss Heathfield, well, she's been coming either on her own or with Mr. Morris for about 9 months.
Thank you, yes.
Prior to the occasion in November, when they gave you this meat, had there been any other times when they'd given you meat?
No, but they've been very good to me. I would never have been able to manage without their help.
Help? What kind of help?
Well, the Social Security were refusing to give me supplementary benefit because I refused to give them the name of Peter's father. Anyway, Mr. Morris went along and sorted it out for me, and I got my benefit.
Thank you very much, Miss Johnson. I have no further questions.
Miss Johnson, I've no wish to embarrass you, but I want my lord and the jury to be quite clear. You are an unmarried mother, are you not?
Yes, I am. Don't worry. I'm not embarrassed about it.
And you've one child, a boy, aged 7 years.
Yes, I have.
Is your main source of income your supplementary benefit?
Yes, it is. You see, the hours I can work are very limited because of Peter. And most of the money I earn goes towards my rent.
But surely as a single-parent family, your rent is paid in full by the Supplementary Benefit Commission.
I wish it was. No, they only pay part of my rent because they think I should move to cheaper accommodation.
Does such cheaper accommodation exist in Fulchester?
No, it doesn't. At least not for an unmarried mother and a child.
You were telling my learned friend just now of the ways that Mr. Morris and Miss Heathfield have been of a help to you. Can you give other examples?
Yes, they sorted out that nonsense about the school dinners for me.
Yes. Could you explain that, please, to my lord and the jury?
Well, because of my low income, my son gets free school dinners. And some time ago, I discovered that he wasn't going in for them. And when I questioned him about it, he told me that he was ashamed to go in for free meals. So I made a few inquiries, and I discovered that at Peter's school, the children who paid were called out every Monday morning to pay, leaving the children on free meals sitting at their desks. And when the school were called in for their lunch, the children on free meals entered through a different door so they could be counted. Anyway, Mr. Morris went along and persuaded the head to change the system. So now the children on free meals are not segregated from the others. Without their help and support over the past 2 years, well, I would have either been in prison or a psychiatric ward, and my son would have been in a state hostel.
Miss Johnson, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
My lord?
No questions, thank you, Mr. Templeton.
So, Mr. Miller, sometime during November last, Mr. Morris and Miss Heathfield called on you and gave you several pounds of frozen beef from a box.
Pardon?
I said sometime during November last, the two defendants called on you and gave you several pounds of frozen beef.
Yes, I've just told you that.
Yes.
They've been very good to me.
So I understand. Did you know that the meat was stolen?
It weren't stolen, they give it me.
Yes, I realise that, but did you realise that the meat they gave you had previously been stolen?
No, I didn't.
I've no further questions, my lord.
Mr. Miller, would you please tell my lord and the jury the circumstances under which you first met Mr. Morris?
Yes. Well, the fire brigade sent Mr. Morris round.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, did you say the fire brigade?
That's right.
Hmm.
Are you a bit deaf too?
I beg your pardon?
Don't worry, it comes to us at our age.
Oh, really?
Yes, I should have a word with Mr. Morris. He's going to fix me up with a deaf head and he'll get one for you at the same time.
Yes, well, you mentioned the fire brigade, Mr. Miller. What connection has that to do with Mr. Morris?
Well, they came round to put the fire out. I'd been burning some old clothes and the blaze got out of hand.
This was in your garden, I presume?
No, in my front room. I'd been burning these old clothes to try and get warm.
Mr. McLennan, is Mr. Morris going to give evidence later on his own behalf?
Yes, my lord.
Thank you. I'd like to know more about you, Mr. Miller. Do you mind if I ask Mr. Morris some questions about your circumstances?
No, you can ask him what you like. And Miss Heathfield, she knows me as well.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
I have no further questions, my lord.
No questions, my lord.
You may leave the witness box, Mr. Miller. Thank you.
My lord, I've called but 2 witnesses to testify to the fact that during November last, the 2 accused were in possession of a stolen box of meat. The meat was, in fact, distributed to another 22 people, and there are statements to that effect. On the depositions, my learned friend has agreed to accept those statements unchallenged in order to save the court's time.
Is that so, Mr. McLennan?
Yes, my lord. The defence accepts that during November last, Miss Heathfield and Mr. Morris did distribute 50 pounds of beef among those 24 people.
Mm-hmm.
My lord, that is the case for the prosecution.
Miss Heathfield, how long have you been a social worker?
Nearly 5 years. I work at the West Lane branch.
And is John Morris your section leader?
Yes, he supervises my work.
I understand that each client you're responsible for is called a case. What is your average case load?
Between 50 and 60 at any given time.
So that at any given time you're looking after between 50 and 60 people?
No, the actual number is much greater. Near 150 people. Most of the cases involve more than one client. Special families, for example.
What are special families, Miss Heathfield?
They used to be called problem families, my lord. Officialdom changed the name because of the stigma. They still have the same problems, though.
I see. Thank you. Mr. McLennan?
Miss Heathfield, before dealing with the specifics of the case, I would like to learn a little about your day-to-day work.
Yes, well, before you embark on that, Mr. McLennan, I wonder if I might ask Miss Heathfield some questions.
My lord.
Miss Heathfield, I was going to question your colleague, Mr. Morris, about Mr. Miller. But it occurs to me you were able to assist me in that area. Do you feel competent to give me some information about him?
Yes, my lord. Mr. Miller is one of my clients. Mr. Morris passed him on to me.
Yes, well, Mr. Miller said something to the effect that the first time he came into contact with your department was because of the fire brigade.
Yes, that's right.
And was he really burning some of his clothes in order to keep warm?
Yes, my lord. The first time our department was called in to see Mr. Miller, he was suffering from hypothermia.
By hypothermia, Miss Heathfield means abnormally low body temperature. Is that not so, Miss Heathfield?
Yes, my lord.
A fairly rare condition.
No, my lord. It's very common amongst the elderly people in this country. In a mild winter, it kills at least 50,000 people. In a severe winter, the number rises to over 80,000. And these are very conservative official estimates. The real figure must be much higher. Over 1 million elderly people are at risk of hypothermia every winter.
What causes hypothermia?
There appear to be many factors, my lord, but the 2 main ones are an inadequate diet and inadequate external heat. With regard to the latter, it has been estimated that over 2 million old people are living in temperatures which would bring instant prosecution if they occurred in factories or offices.
When you quote a figure of 2 million, you refer, of course, internationally. I mean, throughout the world.
No, my lord. I mean just in this country.
Do you indeed? Mr. McLennan?
Miss Heathfield, could you tell us something of Mr. Miller's circumstances when he was first interviewed by Mr. Morris in 1974?
He was living, as he does now, in a 2-room flat on the 5th floor of a Victorian block of flats. His only source of income at that time was his old age pension, £10 a week. His weekly expenditure on rent was £8 a week. In theory, the flat was heated by open coal fires, but coal merchants had consistently refused to deliver coal to his 5th floor flat. The temperature in the flat was found to be 40 degrees Fahrenheit. To live at a temperature below 50 degrees is considered dangerous. Mr. Morris, over a period of time, has been able to obtain from Mr. Miller a decrease in his rent, an increase in his benefits, some blankets, and a convector heater from the Social Services Department. And since that time, our department has been able to arrange a home help for Mr. Miller and the use of the Meals on Wheels service. They call twice weekly.
Yes, thank you, Miss Heathfield. Now,
I forgot to tell you, Mr. Morris also carries bags of coal up to Mr. Miller's flat when they're needed. There is a great deal more I could tell you about Mr. Miller, but I dare say what I have said will do.
I'm sure it will. Now, with regard to the two charges that you face here in this court, I'd like to deal firstly with the single box of meat, the 50 pounds of beef. Did you steal that from the Acme Cold Storage Company?
No, I did not.
You do accept that during the course of last November it was in your possession?
Yes.
And you and Mr. Morris gave it away?
Yes.
To your clients?
Yes, we gave it to those in the greatest need. God knows it was little enough. I'd have given away 10 times the amount if we'd had it.
Would you tell the court how that box of meat came into yours and Mr. Morris's possession?
No, I won't.
Will you tell the court what you were doing, or rather what you intended to do, when you were apprehended in the cabin of the refrigerated lorry on the night of December the 20th on the premises of the Acme Cold Storage Company?
No, I will not.
Miss Heathfield, I must warn you that your refusal to answer your counsel's questions will place you in very great jeopardy.
I don't give a damn. I'd rather rot in prison than answer those questions.
But you do not deny that you had this meat?
No, I don't deny it.
This 50-pound box of frozen meat that had been stolen from that cold storage company.
If you say so.
Well, it's not I that says so, Miss Heathfield. You sat in this court and heard the evidence. Do you contest that the meat you distributed with such largesse was stolen?
Whether I contest it or not is absolutely irrelevant.
Ah, but it is relevant, Miss Heathfield, highly relevant. Now, you've told this court that you did not steal that box of meat.
Yes, that's right.
Well, where did it come from?
I don't know.
Oh, but you do know, Miss Heathfield. You do know, don't you?
I know now, yes.
Oh, now, come now, Miss Heathfield. You knew at the time. You knew when you handled that box of meat where it had come from. Please show the witness Exhibit 5. Will you read out what it says on the side, Miss Heathfield? I take it that you can read.
Save your sarcasm for the jury. It might impress them.
Really, my lord, do we need the gratuitous insults from my learned friend?
We need them neither from counsel nor from witness. Miss Heathfield, Mr. Templeton has asked you to read what is on that box. Would you please do so?
This side up.
Oh, most amusing, Miss Heathfield. Perhaps you'd now read what else is written.
14774 ZBM/IR 58329.
Well, we'll get there eventually. I can well understand your reluctance. Will you read what else is written on the side of that cardboard box?
Acme Cold Storage Company.
Presumably you read that when you and Mr. Morris acquired that box in November last.
I was more interested in what was in it than what was on it.
Oh, yes, I'm sure you were. But you did know, did you not, before you'd given out 1 ounce of that meat, that it had come from that cold storage company?
Yes, I knew.
Ah, finally we begin to progress. You also knew, did you not, that it had been stolen? That is, assuming, of course, that you're telling the truth and that you didn't steal it yourself.
I've already told you I didn't steal it.
Indeed you have. You are, of course, not charged with stealing that box. You're charged with dishonestly handling by receiving it, knowing or believing it to have been stolen. You did know it had been stolen, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Then how did it come to be in yours and Morris's possession?
I'm not answering that question.
Well, his lordship's already told you the consequences of not answering that question. Let's suppose, just for a moment, that you didn't know it had been stolen, that as far as you were concerned it had come into your hands in an entirely legitimate manner. If that were the case, you'd have nothing to hide, would you? If you had acquired that box in what you honestly believed to be a perfectly proper way, you'd have nothing to fear, would you?
I have nothing to fear.
Then pray tell us, Miss Heathfield, where it came from. Tell my lord and the jury how you acquired it.
I can't.
Oh, but you can, Miss Heathfield. It's a case of will not rather than cannot, isn't it?
I am not going to tell you.
Well, did it fall from the sky at your feet? Was it pushed through the letterbox? Did you find it in your desk drawer? If you yourself did not steal it, how did it get into your hands?
Leave her alone. She knows nothing about it.
Mr. Morris, you remain silent whilst you're in the dock. You'll have ample opportunity to speak later.
Am I to remain silent while
Yes. If you interrupt the court proceedings again, you will be taken below and the case will be proceeded with in your absence. Mr. Templeton?
Well, evidently your co-defendant's prepared to be more informative about how a £50 box of meat came to be in your possession. We shall see. Let us turn now, Miss Heathfield, to the night of the 20th of December last year. You and Morris were discovered on private property, were you not?
Yes.
In the cabin of a 14-ton refrigerated lorry?
Yes.
Now, we've heard that this cold storage company is heavily guarded, that it has 5 security checkpoints surrounding it. How did you get in?
We simply walked in.
What? Past a security checkpoint? You may have forgotten that evidence has been given that there are security checkpoints.
You may have forgotten that evidence has also been given that there was no sign of forcible entry.
What was your intention when you and Morris walked past this security gate and climbed into that lorry loaded with nearly £22,000 of meat? What was your intention as you sat in that lorry trying to start it?
We were trying to drive the lorry out of the depot.
So you admit you were trying to steal this large quantity of meat?
No, we were not trying to steal it.
Miss Heathfield, when my learned friend questioned you earlier about that single box of meat, the box of meat you gave away, you said, we gave it to those in the greatest need. God knows it was little enough. I'd have given away 10 times that amount if I'd had it. Now, you did say that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Well, I put it to you that that was precisely what you were about on the night of the 20th of December. You were intent upon stealing this huge quantity of meat to give it away. That is so, is it not?
No, it isn't.
Then what did you intend to do with nearly £22,000 of meat?
We had been told that the meat in that lorry was being taken away to be dumped. We had been told that it had been in cold storage for so long that it had gone bad, that it was rotten, and that the storage company had arranged secretly to dump it.
You've heard Mr. Cunliffe's sworn testimony that the meat in that lorry was not rotten.
Yes, I heard him.
Well, what have you got to say to that?
I say he's lying. He's trying to cover up a scandal.
And what did you intend to do with this large consignment of what you believe to be rotten meat?
We intended to drive it to Fulchester Market Square. We then intended to hold a press conference to expose the situation. We did not intend to keep it or to give it away. In fact, we intended to invite Cunliffe to the press conference.
Miss Heathfield, who told you that the meat was being dumped? Who told you that it was rotten?
I'm not answering those questions.
Well, it appears that you and Morris have a marked inability to answer questions. Detective Inspector Pritchard's testified that you refused to answer his questions or make any statement. Now, why was that?
I decided anything I had to say was better said publicly.
Yet now you're in public and yet you still refuse to answer questions.
I've answered your questions.
Some of them, Miss Heathfield, but not all of them. You even refuse to answer your own counsel's questions. In the light of that, I think it would be pointless to ask you any more.
Miss Heathfield, would you please tell the court a little bit more about this press conference you intended to hold?
I'll try to, Mr. McLennan. At the start of this trial, the prosecution counsel, in his opening speech, referred to John Morris and myself and said that social workers were the welfare state's frontline troops or agents. Indeed, we are. 5 years ago, full of idealistic ideas, I became a social worker. It hadn't been a sudden decision. There was for me no road to Damascus, no sudden blinding light that illuminated our country. I grew up in a protected environment. My parents, though not rich, were not poor. My friends came from similar backgrounds. We were all nice people. Then as I grew older, I found out that there were other people who were not so nice. Those that we term inadequate, others we term handicapped, others we term problem families, others we simply term poor. I became a social worker in order to help those people. I very quickly found out that the only justification for my profession of social worker lay in the maintenance of a social and economic system that is the cause of the ills and evils that I am employed to confront and conquer. My everyday experience has gradually taken me to a position where I am fundamentally opposed to that social and economic system. I don't claim to have any of the answers, but I do know some of the problems. I know, for example, that in every so-called advanced industrial country there is at this time recession, unemployment, poverty, urban decay, crime, and a terrible alienation. At best, we social workers are soft cops, conducting a holding operation for the state. Take, for example, one of my clients who was given some of that meat and who has not been called to give evidence. She's a blind housewife with 3 children. Her husband is sighted and goes to work. He's a farm worker. And his take-home pay is about £27 a week. He doesn't have a tied cottage, but lives here in Fulchester, where he pays a rent of £5 a week for his flat. That means that with family allowances, he has to keep his blind wife and 3 children on £25 a week. Food, clothing, and all the other essentials have to come out of that money. His blind wife does all her own housework, but she finds that cleaning large areas, such as floors, takes a great deal of time. She was told that she does not qualify for a home help. And if her husband employs someone to come in and help her, that means that one of the children goes without a pair of shoes. I've been trying to get that woman a home help for 6 months. I'm still trying. Giving that family a couple of pounds of beef hardly brings sunshine into their lives. But it's better than nothing. Man may not be able to live by bread alone, but it'll do to begin with. These people are desperately poor. We constantly hear of the hardy independence of the poor and how they refuse help. That has not been my experience. They are desperate for help. Refusing help would be like a drowning man disdaining a lifeboat. And while people like that are starving in this city, there are thousands and thousands of tons of beef being slapped into cold storage for no other reason than to maintain a high price. The final obscenity is that there is so much meat in cold storage that some of it, like that particular lorry load, has gone rotten. So, while people starve, the government hoards. How far can political organization override the immediate need to solve the distress of one family? How far can the means be sacrificed to the end?
The cases in Fulchester Crown Court are fictitious, but the jury is comprised of members of the general public. The Queen against Heathfield and Morris will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court.
I call John Morris.
Social workers Jane Heathfield and John Morris have been charged jointly with 2 offences under the Theft Act. As the trial enters its final day, Morris is about to give evidence.
Morris, as a senior social worker, I should imagine that your caseload is somewhat smaller than that of, say, Miss Heathfield.
Yes. My primary concern is to supervise the work of my team of 8 social workers.
How long have you been a social worker, Mr. Morris?
Oh, about 16 years.
Did you, during the course of last November, distribute amongst your clients 50 pounds of beef?
Yes, I did.
And Miss Heathfield assisted you in that distribution?
Yes, that's right.
Did you steal that box of meat from the Acme Cold Storage Company?
No, I did not.
Now, how did it come to be in your possession?
It was given to me.
Who gave it to you?
I'm not prepared to say.
Mr. Morris, I must warn you, as I've already warned Miss Heathfield, that failure to answer such questions will tell heavily against you.
I appreciate that, my lord.
Realizing that, you still refuse to answer the question?
Yes, I do.
Very well.
Did you realize the meat was stolen?
No, I didn't.
The person, or persons who gave you this meat, did they know that you were a social worker?
Yes, yes, of course. That's why they gave it to me.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I was sitting in a pub with Jane, and a man came up to us and said, "You're Mr. Morris, aren't you, the social worker?" And I said I was. He said, "I've got something in my car that I want to give you." Well, I went outside, and he opened the boot of his car and took a box out. There was no lid on it, and I could see that it was full of frozen meat. He said he wanted me to place the meat where it would do the most good. So we took the box away, and subsequently we gave the meat away.
All of it?
Yes. There was nothing dishonest in the transaction, as far as we were concerned.
Did you sell any of it?
No, no, I've already told you we gave it away.
To people who you knew were in need, to your clients?
Yes, yes, that's right.
Did this man ask for payment?
No, I offered him something, but he declined. He said he'd been given a load of meat, and he had more than he could use.
Did you ask the man his name?
No, no, I didn't. Well, I already knew his name.
Well, what is his name?
I've told you I'm not going to reveal his name. Neither Miss Heathfield nor myself will bring any third person into this trial.
And you made not a penny from this 50-pound box of meat?
No, no.
Now, with regard to the night of the 20th of December last, Miss Heathfield has told us that the reason that you were both in the cabin of that lorry that contained the 22,000 pounds of meat was because you believed that meat to be rotten and that it was about to be dumped. Secretly. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's right.
Who told you it was rotten?
I'm not prepared to say.
Well, was it the same man who previously given you the box of meat?
Look here, who told me is not important.
It is for me to judge whether it's important or not, Mr. Morris.
Yes, my lord, but it is for me to judge whether or not I will tell you. I choose not to.
You did not intend to keep that lorry load of meat?
No, no.
Did you intend to give it away?
No, no, I've already told you we intended to call in the press and the television and to publicize what is going on.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Aren't you going to ask me about the press conference?
No, Mr. Morris, I'm not going to ask you about the press conference. I feel that Miss Heathfield has covered that aspect very fully.
Morris. Morris?
What? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
This story you've told about how you and Miss Heathfield received this 50-pound box of meat. Now, you're an intelligent man. I put it to you, you must have known that it was stolen.
No, I did not.
Well, are you in the habit of having people come up to you and offer you boxes of valuable
I've already
meat?
told you that that was the first meat we'd received.
Well, are you in the habit of having people come up to you and offer you other valuable items? A brand new suit of clothes, for example?
Oh, don't be ridiculous.
I venture to submit, Morris, that it's you who are being ridiculous, expecting my lord and the jury to believe such a story.
But I'm not concerned who believes me. It's not important. It shouldn't have anything to do with this trial. It's not what this trial is about.
Oh, but it is, Morris. It's exactly what
No,
this trial
it isn't.
is
This
about.
trial is about poverty and deprivation and greed. It's about the haves and the have-nots.
No, that's what you'd like it to be about. Then we could all forget about your criminal activities. Now, you took possession of a stolen box of meat, did you not?
I took possession of a box of meat, not knowing it to have been stolen.
This man you met in the pub, did you ask him where the meat had come from?
No, no, I didn't.
Did you ask him how it was that, let me see, how did you phrase it? Been given a load of meat and had more than he could use? Did you ask him about that?
No, I didn't. It didn't matter a damn to me where it got the meat. It didn't matter a damn to me whether the meat was stolen or not. We were given it to distribute to the poor in this area, and we were grateful to get it. And they were grateful to get it. And if you hadn't seen a decent piece of meat for the last 2 years, you'd have been grateful for some of it too.
So it didn't matter a damn to you whether the meat was stolen or not?
No, it didn't.
Well, I think that's all I need to know about the first charge you face. Now, with regard to the lorry load of beef, some 22,000 pounds that you're charged with attempting to steal, I put it to you that you intended to drive that lorry out of the cold storage depot.
Well, I've already told you that that is what we intended to do.
I further put it to you that your story of a press conference is an invention, a fabrication to mask the truth, that you intended to be some kind of latter-day Robin Hood and give the meat away to the poor and needy.
I've already told you that that meat was rotten, and it was planned secretly to dump it.
Oh, yes, your story of an anonymous tip-off from a friend. Well, we've not heard any evidence to substantiate that the meat in that lorry was rotten, have we, Morris?
Well, that's because by now Cunliffe's arranged to have it either buried or burned.
But if your story is true, why didn't you tell the police on the night of your arrest?
Well, because by the time we'd got a search warrant and got back to the depot, that rotten meat would have been switched. There would have been 22,000 pounds of perfectly good frozen meat in that lorry.
Oh, yes, of course. No further questions.
My lord, that's the case for the defence.
No, it isn't. There's a lot of evidence yet to be heard.
Mr. McLennan, you seem to be at variance with your client. Perhaps a 5-minute adjournment will be of some use to you?
Indeed so, my lord. I'm much obliged.
All stand.
Is that hand sticking out?
All stand.
Well, Mr. McLennan?
My lord, I wish to be released from this case. My instructions have been withdrawn.
And at this juncture, that will leave your clients undefended.
They wish to defend themselves.
Do they now? Miss Heathfield, Mr. Morris, I must advise against this course of action, particularly at this stage of the proceedings. You're perfectly entitled to defend yourselves, but surely at this late stage it'd be most unwise. Are you sure that you wish to proceed without the aid of counsel?
Yes, my lord.
Very well, so be it. Mr. McLennan, you have my permission to withdraw from the trial.
I would like to call Professor Stuart Adams.
Yes, one moment, please, Mr. Morris. You do realize you cannot defend Miss Heathfield. Each of you now defending yourselves.
Yes, my lord.
Well, as such, in view of the fact that Miss Heathfield's name appears first on the indictment, she should call her witnesses first.
I do not intend to call any witnesses, my lord.
Oh, well, do you wish to examine Professor Adams?
The questions Mr. Morris intends to ask will cover the evidence I wish the jury to hear, my lord.
Ah, I see. Very well, let us proceed. Usher?
Professor Stuart Adams.
I swear by Almighty God the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Professor Adams, could you tell my lord and the jury what qualifications you hold?
I have a BA, I am an MSc, I hold doctorates in science and economics. I'm currently professor of economics at Fulchester University.
Yes, thank you. Now, could you tell us how many people in this country are at present unemployed?
My lord, really, I've no idea why this witness was called, but what have unemployment figures to do with theft and attempted theft?
I've no idea, Mr. Templeton. But in view of the fact that the two defendants feel so strongly that Professor Adams should be called to give evidence, that they are prepared to dismiss their counsel to call him, might I suggest we accord the Professor the privilege of being heard?
Well, the current figures of unemployed in this country varies depending upon the method of measurement used. The crude all-in total at January 1976 stood at 1,430,369, but I personally believe that figure it should be considerably higher, something approaching 1.75 million.
Why the disparity?
Well, recent census reports clearly show, the 1971 census report, for example, that 300,000 people who are not sick or registered as unemployed describe themselves as seeking work or wanting work.
So, on the basis of that information, you would say that at present there are 1.75 million people in this country unemployed?
I would, yes.
Now, Professor, how many people would you say in this country are at present living on or beneath the poverty line, in round figures?
In round figures. The Child Poverty Action Group estimates over 7 million, or put another way, 1 in 8 are living on or beneath the poverty line.
Yes, thank you. Now, Professor, evidence has been given in this trial concerning hypothermia. Miss Heathfield produced evidence which suggests that in a mild winter, 50,000 people may die of hypothermia, and in a severe winter, the number rises to 80,000. Would you accept those figures?
No, I'd not. I'd put the total considerably higher. Hypothermia usually is diagnosed clinically when the body temperature drops below 95 degrees, but the standard clinical thermometer will not register temperatures below 95 degrees. So it is possible and indeed certain that many cases of hypothermia are incorrectly diagnosed. A person may then also get bronchitis, pneumonia, and die. Cause of death is entered as one of the latter when it should have been hypothermia. But even taking the conservative estimate as quoted by Miss Heathfield, that means that, now let me think, this case is in its third day. That means that since this case began, 140 people have died of hypothermia.
These would be elderly people?
No, not only elderly people, that also takes into account infant mortality. We have a higher infant mortality rate than many countries, Finland, Sweden, France, Japan. There are others.
My lord, I fail to see what all this has to do with the alleged theft of meat. What have unemployment figures, poverty lines, and hypothermia to do with this case?
My lord, if he wants me to question the professor about food, I'd be happy to do so.
There you are, Mr. Templeton. That should take care of your point. For myself, I'm not certain whether Professor Adams' evidence is relevant or not at this stage. There can be no doubt it's very frightening. Mr. Morris?
No, yes, Professor, in view of Mr. Templeton's remarks, I'd like to question you about food. Could you tell us how much food wastage occurs in this country annually, and how much does it cost?
Well, the Ministry of Agriculture estimates that we waste 25% of Britain's food. Estimates as to the worth of that waste are between 2 and 3 billion pounds.
Did you say billion, Professor?
Yes, my lord, between 2 and 3 billion pounds. Difficult to be more specific because of continually rising inflation and other factors, but it would be well over 2 billions.
Annually?
Yes, my lord.
Professor, this wasted 25%, how many more people would that feed?
Well, 14 million people could be easily sustained on such an amount. It's been estimated by the Ministry of Agriculture that Britain's 5.6 million dogs and 4.2 million cats eat as much food in a year as could satisfactorily sustain a further 2 million people.
You know, this wastage of food, is this a current phenomenon?
No, it's been going on for some time, getting increasingly worse. There is, of course, wastage due to industrial or political actions.
Yes. Could you give us some examples of that, Professor?
Well, during the dock strike in August 1972, tomatoes in Guernsey were dumped or destroyed at the rate of 150 tons a day. During the same strike, 20 million bananas were dumped in the Atlantic. In the summer of 1971, 500,000 tons of potatoes were dumped down disused mine shafts because they were considered surplus to our needs. That was nothing to do with industrial action, that was official policy. Other examples of official policy were the government's announcement that it intended to spend £22 million in compensation to farmers for wheat and skimmed milk, which the government intended deliberately to render unfit for human consumption by spraying with a dye or fish oil. It has been planned to give the spoiled food to animals. In January of this year, government announced that we were faced with a surplus of 150 million eggs. They also announced their solution to the problem. It authorized the slaughter of 300,000 hens. It was then announced that the hens would not be sold for human consumption, but would be used to make glue. At virtually the same time, the Bacon Curers Authority announced that they were spending £200,000 on a publicity campaign to publicise bacon and eggs for breakfast.
Really, my lord, to judge from this evidence, it's not Heathfield and Morris who should be in the dock, but the entire nation. How much more of this must we endure?
There are a lot of people out there in the streets, Mr. Templeton, who are asking the same question.
My lord, how is the evidence of Professor Adams relevant to the issues of this case?
May I answer that, my lord?
Certainly.
Ever since the beginning of this trial, the prosecution have attempted to confine the issue to the very narrow specifics whether Jane Heathfield and myself are guilty of dishonest handling or attempted theft. I maintain the issue is much broader, but even by the prosecution's meagre yardstick, the evidence of Professor Adams is highly relevant to the charges we face.
My lord, may I ask how?
Yes, when I was in that witness box giving evidence about the press conference we intend to hold, you called me a liar. What did you say exactly? Yes, thank you, Jane. You said, I further put it to you that this story of a press conference is an invention, a fabrication to mask the truth. But the evidence of Professor Adams absolutely refutes that suggestion.
In what way, Mr. Morris?
Because, my lord, I intended to be present at that press conference and I was going to give out the information that I am now giving out.
Ah, well, that seems to take care of the matter of relevance, does it not, Mr. Templeton? It seems to me perfectly right and proper that if part of the defence is that these two people did not intend permanently to deprive the Acme Cold Storage Company of that lorry load of meat, then any evidence that supports that contention should be heard.
Professor, now, evidence has been given in this trial concerning the huge amounts of food that is wasted within the EEC, so I don't wish to trouble with that aspect. But could you tell us of some specific trading abuses within the EEC which costs this country and the other member countries a great deal of money?
Well, it has been estimated that fraud and irregular practices by farmers and traders in the EEC cost the community £50 million a year. Frauds work in a variety of ways: false returns by farmers claiming subsidies, smuggling of butter from one EEC country to another member country and then re-importing it back to the original country at double the cost. Another example was the Irish trader who had 1,000 tons of barley moved from Southern Ireland to Northern Ireland. He then applied for an export license to re-import the barley to Southern Ireland. EEC gave it to him and gave him £10,000 under its accessionary compensation scheme. For all I know, the trader is still moving lorry loads of barley between Southern and Northern Ireland and making £10,000 per trip. And of course, he would still own the barley.
Professor, I'd like to thank you very much for giving this evidence.
Mr. Templeton?
No, my lord, I've no questions to ask this witness.
My lord, that is the case for the defence.
You may have wondered, as I have wondered during the past 3 days, who was on trial here and what the issues really are. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may think you can forget, as I do, the evidence of Professor Adams. Indeed, you may think, as I do, that you can forget the vast bulk of the evidence offered by the defence. These two people are charged on 2 counts. Firstly, they're charged with dishonestly handling by receiving a quantity of meat knowing or believing it to have been stolen. Secondly, they're charged with attempting to steal 21,840 pounds of meat and the lorry that contained that meat. That's all that concerns us, not blind housewives or mothers of illegitimate children, not beef mountains or wine lakes. I submit that they intended to do with that lorry load of meat exactly what they'd done with that box of meat: give it away. Modern-day Robin Hoods, social workers turned philanthropists, with other people's goods. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have they not, out of their own mouths, clearly shown that they're both guilty?
Miss Heathfield, do you wish to address the jury?
No, my lord. I'm content to leave our final words to John. His defence is my defence.
Mr. Templeton has asked who is on trial here. Of course, in a narrow sense, it is Miss Heathfield and myself. But in a broader sense, we are all on trial here. We live in a country where 84% of the wealth is owned by 7% of the people. We live in a world where every year $200 billion are spent on armaments, in a world where nearly 500 million people are suffering from some form of hunger. Every week in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, 10,000 people die of starvation. As man's power has expanded, so has his vision shrunk. We can get in Concorde from London to Bahrain in just over 4 hours. Yet Miss Heathfield finds it impossible to get, for a blind housewife, a home help. We've landed on the moon, and yet 2/3 of the world have an average annual income of £40 per head. Now, in 1957, the then Prime Minister Harold Macmillan told us, "You've never had it so good." In 1964, Prime Minister Harold Wilson told us of his government's burning desire to abolish poverty. In 1970, Prime Minister Edward Heath declared, "Our purpose is not to divide, but to unite, and where there are differences, to bring reconciliation." Well, in the past 3 days, you've heard a lot about the state of our country. I leave it to you to judge the validity of our politicians, and I leave it to you to judge of our guilt or innocence. But in 1966, this country, with many others in the United Nations, signed a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 11 of that declaration recognizes the right of everyone to have an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including the fundamental right of everyone to be free of hunger, to have adequate clothing and housing, and to experience a continuous improvement of living conditions. I maintain that the action Miss Heathfield and I took is in direct accord with that Bill of Rights, and I contend that it doesn't matter a damn whether we knew that the meat was stolen or not, or whether we intended to give away a whole lorry load of beef. Well, I ask you to agree with that contention.
Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? I'll just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On count 1, handling by receiving, do you find the defendant, Jane Heathfield, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On count 2, theft, do you find the defendant, Jane Heathfield, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On count 1, handling by receiving, do you find the defendant, John Morris, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On count 2, theft, do you find the defendant, John Morris, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
The cases in Fulchester Crown Court are fictitious, but the jury is comprised of members of the general public. Our cameras will return and bring you another leading case in the Crown Court.